We hang the petty thieves and appoint the great ones to public office. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. The topic of discussion today is pirates in politics. To discuss all this and more, we've invited four guests to our studios this evening as well. Let me quickly introduce them to you. Joining us this evening on the show are Dr. Pakisoti Saravanmuthu, Executive Director of the Centre for Policy Alternatives, Attorney at Law Swastika Arulingam, political activist, Nicole Elias, Program Manager, Transparency International Sri Lanka, as well as Attorney at Law Asela Kalugampitia, Director, Centre for Evaluation at the University of Sri Javaradhanapura. To pose questions from our panelists, onto my immediate right is Shanaya Dadigama. Onto my immediate left is Niresh Shediyathambi, who's a senior journalist joining us this evening on Face the Nation. You too can join in with the conversation. You can direct your questions to 076 656 5353. The number once again, 076 656 5353. We would be happy to take your questions as the show goes on. So let's start off tonight's show with Dr. Pakisoti Saravanmuthu, Executive Director, CPA, on the subject matter at hand, pirates in politics.
Well, thank you. You know, when you talk about pirates in politics, I'm sure most of you know, today is the 41st anniversary of one of the most horrendously piratical acts that took place in this country, the burning of the Jaffna Library. It was a rich, rich resource of heritage, of literature, and it was burnt. Not a single person has been held responsible for it. There are all sorts of stories alleging very high up people, etc., but no one has been held responsible. Now that's what happens with pirates in politics, and I don't know whether you will indulge me just for a moment, if we can just take a minute's silence to just reflect on what that horrendous atrocity did to our country in 1982. Just a minute's silence, just to commemorate that horrendous catastrophe that happened. No one has been held to account. Just 1 minute silence, if you indulge me.
Yes, Dr. Sara, 1 minute is a long time on television. But
right, so no, but anyway, but I think the point has been made. I mean, we tend to forget about all the atrocities that have been committed in the last 40 to 50 years in this country. It's a huge list. But okay, we're talking about pirates in politics. What are we really talking about here? We're talking about people like all of these people around this table who get nominations, who get into politics, if their party wins, gets into government, and then is lured by corruption, both financial as well as corruption in terms of power. The first point I want to make with regard to it is that any of us here could be a pirate in politics. I don't think that the politicians are a different breed. They don't fall from the sky or turn up from under a stone. They're us, and we put them there. Okay? That's the first point. The second point is that, all right, how do we control them? How do we lessen the layer of corruption? Now, it's a big argument to whether, you can have institutions and laws that will curb them, or is it really at the end of the day the people? Because when you look at our laws and institutions, they're not all that bad, but they're never implemented. They're never implemented properly. And so that question is that constant sort of tension between, do we need new laws? All the politicians, whenever you come up with a problem, they'll tell you that you need a new law. Or you need a new committee to sit down and think about the law, and by that time the law comes, Parliament is dissolved, and we go into another phase of things. So we have to look at that also very carefully. But I think at the end of the day, we need to look at our education system. At the end of the day, we need to be able to bring kids out of school who are prepared, equipped capable of being proper citizens of a functioning democracy. You know, that's what's important. You know, I spent the last 2 weeks observing elections in Thailand, and there is vote buying across the board. No one complains about it because they say that everyone does it. And they say, look, it's part of our culture. Now, is piracy in politics in Sri Lanka, piracy here defined in terms of a flagrant violation of the laws, the institutionalization of impunity, is that part of our culture? That's the question I suppose we're trying to answer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pakiso Saravamuthu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. I now move my attention towards Attorney at Law Swastika Arulingam, political activist.
The title which you have given for today's session is Pirates in Politics. And when I heard this title, I was reminded of an article or a journal article which I read a few years ago. And that particular author, she talks about pirates. And she raises the question, who are these pirates? What are pirates? And pirates are essentially people in the yesteryears. They were people who were disrupting the status quo. They were standing in the edge of the state and they were disrupting the status quo through violent means. And the journal article actually compares pirates of yesteryears to today's terrorists. And she says pirates and terrorists have very similar characteristics. For instance, terrorists also are people who stand in the edge of the state and they disrupt the status quo by using violence. And therefore, when the state deals with pirates and terrorists, they have to first demonize them, they have to dehumanize them, and when they actually brought into the legal system, we are told, the society is told, they don't have to be protected by the law because they're not humans, they're violent, they're disruptors, they're violent, and so on. So the reason I'm thinking about this term pirate is because the title for today is Pirates in Politics, and I wonder whether the political leadership in our country, whether we can actually call them pirates. Because pirates are supposed to be people who are standing outside the status quo. But what we have is leadership and politicians who are the status quo. They sit as the status quo. They corrupt the system as the status quo. The status quo has become this putrid system, which till last year, millions of people came out onto the streets and say, we want a system change, we want the status quo changed. So I want to also, question the term pirates in terms of whether we can call democratically elected leaders pirates or whether they are in fact the status quo. The second observation which I want to make is in terms of corruption and how we understand corruption. Now, in several discourses in society, I think many of us are very comfortable with talking about corruption in the public sector. And I think till the 1970s, it was adequate and enough to talk about corruption in the public sector because we had a state-driven economy. The economy was driven by the state. But soon after the 1970s, when the economy was liberalized, the state was no longer the primary factor, the driving factor of the economy. It was the private sector. So, since the 1970s, I think when we talk about corruptions, it's not adequate or enough to talk about only corruption in the public sector. But we also have to speak about corruption in the corporate sector, in the private sector, and how that affects democracy. And how now Dr. Pakiso spoke about, vote buying. How does that affect democratic processes? If when we say our politicians are corrupt, where are they receiving this money from? Who is corrupting them? And when we start looking into these questions, we realize that corruption is not something which is relegated to the public sector. We also have to start looking at the corporate sector in terms of corruption. And when we start looking into this question, we realize the corruption in the public sector, in a sense, is almost transparent because we have the Auditor General's Department doing audit and these reports are public. We have the RTI, where we can raise questions from the public sector and obtain answers. But the private sector is not so transparent. Annual reports are not published all the time unless it's listed in the stock market. So corruption is not so visible in the private sector as it is in the public sector. So I want to also in this discussion, if we talk about corruption, I want to also broaden that scope and raise that issue of corporate corruption, which has been disrupting the political status quo of this country.
Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Swastika Arulingam, a political activist. I now move my attention towards Nicole Elias, Program Manager, Transparency International, Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Shamin. So I think drawing a lot from what Dr. Sarvanamuthu and also Swastika just mentioned, Sri Lanka seems to be, when you talk about corruption in Sri Lanka, it's systemic. It's embedded in every system that we live in, right? From the school system, from trying to get your child into school, you're asked to pay some exorbitant fine or a bribe. From when you go to a normal public authority to get something that you're entitled to receive, maybe it's to get a permit, maybe it's to get something as simple as a samurdhi benefit. You have this power dynamic where you're being asked to pay something for something you're entitled to receive. It's something so normalized in our culture that we find no way to get out of it. And now in that sense, then also when we're talking about in the private sector as well, you find the private sector being often victimized as well. I fully agree with what she mentioned about this being the supply side, but you also see them being victimized as well. When they are trying to get some work done, the public authority who knows that they have money will say, you know what, if you want this done, if you want this permit, you have to pay something, you have to grease my palms rather, those kind of sentiments are there when we're working with corporates. And in the same way, also tying to what they said with politicians, there's someone giving them money. It's people like you and me at this very table, at this very forum, right? We often talk about the politicians are bad, there's no point in electing these same people, and then we end up complaining about it. But we're also not taking an internal reflection at ourselves. We are also, we have the power to vote them in, right? We are the ones voting them in. So if everyone has a problem with them, why are we keeping on voting for the same system, the same culture, right? So those are a lot of things that we need to think about when talking about corruption in such a wide sense, right? And from everything you said, from going from even the school children, right? When you're being brought up in a household where you see your parents engaging in bribery and corruption, whether it's something as simple as bribing the garbage collectors to come and collect your garbage on a certain day and time, they see it, they normalize it, they internalize it, and we come into this system of saying, oh, we can't change corruption, we've been brought up with it, and you can't go anywhere from it, right? So I think it'll be interesting to talk about with others also about the fact that corruption is so systemic, and sometimes we don't really see a way out. Even when doing maybe awareness sessions, when talking to people, you often find people saying there's no point. There's nothing you can do about it. So you're preaching to a deaf choir, basically.
Thank you very much, Nicole Elias, Program Manager, Transparency International, Sri Lanka. I'm dying to pose questions to the panelists, but unfortunately, because it's the first round, I won't do so. But to get some direction, Attorney at Law Aseli Kalugampete, with regard to the work you do, just tell us a little bit about the Center for Evaluation at the University of Sri Lanka, because the public are quite well aware of the work that the CPA has done over the years. Swastika as a political activist as well as Transparency International. But when we speak about Center for Evaluation, what does it really do? Just appraise us. I'll give you a few seconds and then we can go back to the topic at hand.
Okay. Thank you very much for asking for this question, because Center for Evaluation at the Sri Jayawardhanapura University is the first and only evaluation center in any public university in Sri Lanka, and also as far as I know in South Asia. It was established in 2016 to promote evaluation, especially through the academic sector, because now evaluation is of course needed because the question is whether our programs, what we are doing in the country, are evaluated. If they are evaluated, and we have findings and recommendations to improve them, whether we are in this situation in this country. So that's why evaluation is important. And also at the Jawaharlal University, there is a course, postgraduate diploma in monitoring and evaluation. This is the only course in Sri Lanka on monitoring and evaluation.
Right.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Asela Kaluganpitiya. Asela Kaluganpitiya is an attorney at law as well as the director for Center for Evaluation at the University of Sri Lanka. I'll give an opportunity to take an approach to the topic at hand today, pirates in politics.
Yeah. I want to start with this Turkish proverb. The forest was shrinking, but the trees kept voting for the axe. For the axe was clever and convinced the trees that because his handle was made of wood, he was one of them. I think this reflects Sri Lankan politics, both voters as well as politicians, I think. This is what we have been doing in the past. I also want to quickly tell you some figures. This is, the budget allocated by the Parliament for the President since 2012 and 2023. Now, 2012 is 6.1 billion rupees for the President. I'm sure that there are some institutions under him or her. And then
President Mahinda Rajapaksa, just to be
at that
clear.
time,
at
yes.
that time.
And 2013, 7.4 billion, likewise. And then 2016, it's 2015 also 9.5 billion. And 2016, it comes down to 2.392 billion. So as a citizen of this country, I'm wondering, I never knew this until I, explored this information. I'm wondering how come it came down to 2.5 in 2016 after 9.582 billion for the previous year, and then to 2019 it's 13.55 billion for the president. And this is references from the appropriation bills 2018 and 2023 from the Parliament. And this year actually 3.78 billion for the president. Now. So this is only the annual expenses for the president, right?
Just to give some clarity to the people who are watching the show tonight,
Yeah.
Asela. So when you say 2016, it was Maithripala Sirisena in power.
Yeah.
And 2019, when you speak about the 13 billion, that's also President Maithripala Sirisena in power, or is it
There
President
was a
Gotabaya
presidential
Rajapaksa?
election in between, right?
That's at the latter stages of the year.
Yeah.
So
from
at the
November.
start of the year, it's President Maithripala Sirisena.
Yeah, I
Right.
think we need clarification on this for sure.
Okay. Just to give
why?
so people are aware. Okay.
And also now, 2015, 100 days, it's the budget, there was a budget, it's 2.5 billion, and because 2015 initial budget is 9.592 billion. So even there's a difference within that. Now, also to elect a president, I think last presidential election, the cost was 4 billion, if I remember correctly, right? Divided by 5 years, so 0.8 billion to elect a president. Then you spend this much per year. And if it is 5 years, let's say 3.7 billion, so it's more than 15 billion for sure, close to, I think, 20 billion. Now, I also want to compare this with debt of this country as a percentage of government revenue. Now, 1979, it was 23%. Then, up to 1990, it was 47%. So it increased. So we have executive presidents, and then we spend money like that for the president. But our performance at the end as a country, these are the indicators, right? So our debts as a percentage of the government revenue, it goes up. And 47% 1990, 91, it exceeds 50%. It's 58%. Then 100%, it's 108% in 2002. and now it is 163%. Now in the sense 2021, not now actually, right? I think we don't know what is the percentage now. 163%. So we spend for our decision maker, the main decision maker, the executive president, this much, and this is the progress of the country. So we are improving or going down? That's my question. I know that my time is up, but I just want to quickly mention, I mentioned about the president's expenses. Now two presidents, President Mahinda Rajapaksa and President Maithripala Sirisena. So there was a request from CPA and RTI, she mentioned about RTI. Lionel Guruge, right, your colleague, requested this information from the government to inform him about private staff, personal staff used by these two presidents. He requested this information and he got it after 2 years. She mentioned that there is Right to Information Act, but this person received this information after 2 years of the request. This is how the Right to Information Act works. Now my point is not that. Mahinda Rajapaksa had 2,578 personal staff according to this information. This was on media, that's why I'm saying this, right? And the cost for that was 630 million rupees. And President Maithripala Sirisena had 1,317 staff, 850, this is personal staff, 850 million rupees the cost for 4 years, 5 years, and Mahinda Rajapaksa, President Rajapaksa was also 2010 to 2014. Now total personal staff used by both of them 3,895, and the cost, total cost was 1.5 billion rupees for this country. My question is that they are getting, as presidents, official staff, official presidential secretariat. Why so many personal staff?
Right.
Right.
So we'll talk about all that, Attorney at Law, Cell Kalkampitiya, as the show goes along. So on to my immediate right, as I said before, is Shania. On to my immediate left is Niresh, who's a senior journalist. With your permission, of course, Shania, can we start off the show with Niresh?
Thank you. Thank you, Shamir.
Yes.
Yes. Now, this morning, a police sergeant attached to the Waligama police was arrested for soliciting a bribe of 10,000 rupees, just 10,000. At the same time, we have a member of parliament who attempted to smuggle in 70 million rupees worth of gold, and he paid what one can consider to be a trifling fine of, I believe, 7 million rupees, and he's out virtually scot-free, still a member of parliament, and at the same time the hard questions as to where he got 70 million rupees to go and buy gold in foreign currency, mind you. You can't go to Dubai and buy it in rupees. How he got it across, and why the Inland Revenue Department isn't even looking at it as far as the public is aware. But life goes on in Sri Lanka. So can I ask Nicole, what are your thoughts about this complete institutional failure?
So what I can say is, now if we're talking about asset declarations, for example, right? We all, I'm not sure if everyone knows, but for those who don't, the current law as it stands requires that members of parliament should declare their assets once a year and not just before an election, which we commonly hear about, right? Once a year to the Speaker of Parliament. There is no provision in the current law to make it publicly accessible, to publicly declare their assets. So something that we've been doing at TI is also asking MPs to declare their assets, right? To publicly declare their assets. And there is a web page that we've been hosting where, if I remember correctly, there's about 17 MPs that have declared their assets at this moment publicly. But interestingly, the new anti-corruption bill that's coming, that's currently tabled in Parliament, the current asset declaration law is going to be repealed and replaced with this new anti-corruption bill, which will have a provision of asset declarations. And in the new law, they're supposed to publicly declare it as well. There's going to be the introduction of an online system. It will be housed with the commission, with CIABOC, the Commission to Investigate Allegations of Bribery or Corruption, or what we all know as a Bribery Commission for short. So they would then have access to each MP's asset declaration, and they can carry out investigations on this. They can track to see, how the wealth has been amassed across the years, because right now it's not possible, right? Right now, if any of you, if you want, can ask for an MP's asset declaration under the existing law, but you have to pay a fine. You have to pay a fee of 750 rupees, and you can get it, and anyone can get it. Any
under
person.
the RTI?
No, under the asset declaration law, the current law.
Because I don't want to wait for 2 years to get the information.
I understand. So you can get this under the asset dec law, but the problem is there's a secrecy provision, which means that now if you get the law, you cannot show it to Naresh. So it's kind of not really fit for purpose. So the new law seeks to repeal that, which is a really good thing.
Because what am I going to do as a journalist by getting that information and having
exactly
myself?
Exactly.
I might as well put it on the public domain.
Correct, which is why the new law is good in a sense, right? Because it's making it publicly available, and you can then everyone can access it, right? So now talking about you were talking about the failure of the institution, right? So in cases like this, we always hear people saying, you're catching the small fish. What about the small fry? What about the big fish? Corruption, like I mentioned earlier, is so systemic, so ingrained in our country that you usually see in the news, school principal gets fined for taking 100,000 bribe. But then, like you mentioned, MP gets left, not without getting fined, right? So the interesting thing is there's this concept called kleptocracy, right? It's this idea that powerful individuals, whether it be politicians, wealthy businessmen, even foreign individuals, people who have the resources to do it, form this network where they kind of come together and kind of rule things in a way that seem to benefit.
No, Nicole, just to piggyback on what Niresh said, I think Niresh hit the nail right on the head, because when you are a passenger traveling overseas, you can only take up to $10,000 US. Okay, that's point number one. So how did the minister spend 70 million to amass that much of gold and bring it to Sri Lanka? Now the real question is, when an individual, a normal citizen of the country, goes and purchases a house with his hard-earned money, he's been called to the Inland Revenue Department to tell the Inland Revenue Department individuals as to how he amassed that much of money to get the house in question. Now this MP who brought in 70 million rupees worth of gold, on top of that 4.2 million worth of phones, has now, according to Dala Salah Peruma, has flown back to Dubai. Now this is not what I'm saying, this is what a member of parliament is saying. He has gone back to Dubai. So where is the Inland Revenue Department then? What is happening with these individuals? Look at how president's sons have bought houses worth hundreds of millions of rupees. Where is the Inland Revenue Department then? Now that's the question that Niresh wants to know.
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
What are they doing now? Isn't it a failure by the part of the Inland Revenue Department and the people who are in charge? It shouldn't be the people who should be held responsible. Now Dr. Sarah said that people should be held responsible because at the end of the day, people appoint politicians to office. What are your thoughts? I'll come back to you, Dr. Sarah. Yeah, Nicole.
So on the second one, right?
Yeah.
So
no, on the first one.
On the first
Inland Revenue Department. What are they doing?
Okay.
What is Transparency International doing?
So
in a situation
usually,
like that?
yeah. So usually we tend to get confused with law enforcement, which unfortunately we're not. We can call out things where we see it, but
Now, when there's red flag, you can call it and say, this is a red flag, isn't it? That's what civic rights organizations do, like even Dr. Sarah's organization or Transparency International, the Center for Evaluation. That's your role, isn't it?
So what we have been doing right now is also calling out institutional failure, right? We've been talking about the fact that I think, like Dr. Sarah mentioned at the beginning also, we have good laws in place. Now, for example, in this case, if a bribe was committed, like you were mentioning, it should have actually been captured, right? It should have been, there should have been a prosecution that happened. But the implementation of the laws,
No,
it's
we are not
good.
talking about the small fish or the small fry, as you mentioned before,
Yeah.
Nicole. We are not talking about the constable who took 10,000 rupees. We are not talking about that. We are talking about a public representative who enters Sri Lanka with 70 million rupees worth of gold plus 4.2 million worth of phones, and how he can return out of the country scot-free. That's the question.
Yeah. Again, it goes
I
back
don't know.
to to the same issue, right? If it's now we seem to see that the Sri Lanka seems to be a kleptocracy where things are being kind of moved in a certain way, benefiting certain people. So if this particular MP has some kind of link to someone powerful, let's say more powerful, that is probably the reason that they are getting away with it, right? So, and if the correct institutions don't do their work properly, that's why we have a problem.
And based on what Dala Salhaperumal said, Niresh, this is not the first time that this MP has done it. He has travelled overseas a couple of times. And we don't know whether he carried gold at that time, unfortunately or fortunately.
And
But
by the way,
this is the
Shamir,
public domain.
we're paying his salary.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Sarah, you spoke about...
Shamir, I just have a question for
Yes.
Dr. Saranamatu. In your opening statement, I think, just like Nicole and Swastika also mentioned, we are ultimately responsible for voting them in. The power rests in our hands. But I think, given our, I would say, low levels
that,
of...
but yeah. I didn't say people are... Anyway, I can
Okay,
talk
sorry.
about that later, yeah.
So, Nicole and both of you mentioned that, we vote them in ultimately, right? And also one is lack of a better alternative, but also given our low levels of political literacy, voter literacy, how could you break this cycle? It will just be a never-ending cycle of, it's a vicious cycle of corruption. And like Nicole said, from every level you see it. So given our low levels of political literacy, how can you break out of that vicious cycle?
No, it's a very, very long-term task. I mean, I think you have to start with the education system. I mean, and as someone pointed out, entrance into schools in this country is the beginning of corruption. Because you always want to send your child to the best school possible, and if you're outside of the 2-mile radius, you get a fake address. And to that fake address, you get your electricity bills, etc., to prove that you are within the 2-mile radius. And so everyone is invited into this whole net of corruption. So one of the things is that we have to sort of put an emphasis on anti-corruption as far as our education system is concerned. But quite frankly, beyond that, it's a question of political will and commitment. If you have a government, if you have the state agencies that are willing to go after, I mean, look, in 2015, all of this stuff about recovering stolen assets and all of that, there were a variety of committees. They did a lot of work. Nothing came out of it. That work is still there. Presumably those files are gathering dust somewhere. You have to have that political commitment. And so the question here is that, are the people of this country going to place anti-corruption as the key issue that they're going to use when it comes to voting? And if nothing happens as far as that government or whatever is concerned, is there a quick way of getting recall, whatever, so that we really do focus on this and get going with it? I mean, and the other point, of course, is this. I mean, with regard to some of the stolen assets and all of that, it's not going to come back however hard you try day after tomorrow. So people have to be told that it's going to take quite some time. I mean, you have the classic example of the Marcoses in the Philippines. You have got not more than 10% at the very most of what has been stolen, because as the technology increases, in order to catch them, they also avail themselves of that technology to evade capture. So, but at the end of the day, it is about the political commitment and conviction to catch. I mean, I think today, for example, one thing that everyone wants is to get one of those big fish behind bars. That will make such a world of difference to everything. It will change the political context and climate. Why is it not happening?
Dr. Sarab, now, if you look at the past, I recollect the 1994 presidential election in Sri Lanka, where Chandrika Bandaranaike was appointed as
94.
the 94 elections. And one of her pledges to the public was that those who are corrupt would be brought to Galle and would be named and shamed, and action would be taken against them. Then we see corruption happening and rampant in the country. In 2015, the good governance government came into play, and they promised to name and shame those who were corrupt. But nothing happened. We're talking about a political will that is not there in Sri Lanka. It's an utter joke.
Yeah, so you take the Chandrika government in '94, they brought in the Seabok Act, right? The allegations of corruption, bribery. But that was just a change of the law. You're absolutely right. When it came to pursuing the cases, implementing the cases, there was neither will, nor interest, nor conviction in doing so. So, I mean, this is a question that we have to ask ourselves. How do we get public servants who are committed to anti-corruption? How does that happen? I mean, one of the things, you can think of various institutional reforms. One of the things, of course, is that, you can break up the Attorney General's office and you have a Director of Public Prosecutions. The Attorney General is the government's chief lawyer, and so you break that up and things like that. But still, if you don't have the individuals who are determined to go ahead and do it, I mean, you look at Hong Kong, for example, that whole police number there. You suddenly got people who came in, some came in from outside, and cleaned it up, because that was their mission, their mandate. Here we don't have that. So I think it is, I go back to this, it is ultimately the people of this country who have to get up and say, look, enough is enough, we are going to hold you into account. Not just vote you into power, but once you're in power, we are going to hold you to account.
That's what people did last year.
Sorry?
That's what people did last
Yes,
but yes, Dr. Sarab, you want to add something?
No, yes. People did that last year in terms of getting rid of the Rajapaksas out of government. They are not out of politics. Neither do we have a clear, coherent program of reform that is to come. Yeah. So, yes, the Aragalia did succeed in doing that, but the Aragalia has not brought out, I think, the agenda of reform. That's what we need, and that's the next step. I'm not blaming the Aragalia at all for it, but yes.
Swastika, now you spoke in your opening remarks about the system change that the country was looking at. Looking at how things are panning out to be now, are you satisfied with what's happening right now? Because it seems like people are now accepting the status quo in Sri Lanka, what is going on in the country, and everything seems to be hunky-dory now. There seems to be nothing wrong with what happened a year ago. Everything seems to be okay. Is that something that we as citizens of the country should accept? Is this the change we wanted, or is this the change we envisaged to achieve last year?
I think the people who started the Aragalia was primarily started by an urban young population in Colombo and in the suburbs of Colombo. And I think the Aragalia was, the catalyst for the Aragalia was the fact that these long power cuts and the queues and also the fuel shortage. So that was the catalyst for the initial occupation, right? So that, to some extent, at least in the Colombo area, you don't see fuel queues anymore for various reasons. And of course, the power cuts have gone down. But if you just walk out, I always say this, right? If you go 45 minutes away from Colombo, if you go to the Katnaika, for instance, the free trade zones, where you have the free trade zone workers and so on, if you speak to them, and I speak to them on a regular basis because I'm a trade unionist, people have stopped eating. I mean, if you eat one meal per day, you are lucky. People have stopped using electricity because the tariffs are up by 200%. So the children aren't studying anymore because they can't use the light electricity in the night. So this normalcy which is being maintained, or which is being maintained through various ways, through suppression on the streets. I mean, if you do a protest on the streets, a battalion of military and police comes on, so the streets are being cleaned of any democratic protests. Then of course we saw the recent arrests of media persons, particularly from the alternative media. So the suppression, the suppression which is carried out by the state has been quite effective in terms of curtailing democratic protests against the status quo. Now history shows us when governments have curtailed the right of, or suppressed the right of people to democratically protest, one day that erupts into violence. And that is what all of us are worried about, because the normalcy which is being maintained is not normal. People not eating in this country is not normal, it's a crime. People not using electricity in this country, children are not going to schools because they can't afford transport, is not normalcy. Children fainting in schools is not normalcy. So this normalcy we are seeing is a normalcy which has been brought by state suppression and oppression. And when it erupts, and that's the thing which we have to be worried about, when it erupts, and history has shown us it has been violent. So the question is, do we as citizens who have relatively social power, do we want that? And if we don't want that, are we doing enough to question it?
So, Asela, you spoke very eloquently about the work that the Center for Evaluation at the University of Sri Lanka is doing right now. But I want to get some context to it. When you say evaluation, do you mean that a ministry or a department of evaluation should be established in Sri Lanka, and it has to come under the direction of the president, and the president should be involved and look at the KPIs of the ministers and ensure that they are very well monitored, and the implementation of projects are happening on the best interest of the public?
Yeah, exactly. Now, evaluation should be under the head of the government, head of the state actually. Now, some countries, for example, South Africa, monitoring and evaluation planning, monitoring and evaluation department is under the presidency in South Africa, and directly reporting to the president. So they conduct evaluations of all the ministries, different programs, policies, even policies, laws can be evaluated. Then they submit the evaluation report to the cabinet and the parliament. So these are the decision makers. Parliament approve the national budget every year, and they decide priorities. So they need evaluation reports, right? So there are examples. I can give you more examples. Now, in Sri Lanka, we are the only country having national evaluation policy in South Asia. None of the other South Asian countries have evaluation policy. Sri Lanka has. This is the only country. But of course, we have to discuss how it is implemented and whether it is implemented, right? And Nepal has evaluation in their constitution, national constitution, monitoring and evaluation board. But there is no policy.
If I'm not mistaken, during the J.R. Jawardhan era, there was the Ministry of Plan and Implementation, isn't it? That was scrapped by the brother of President Mahinda Rajapaksa. And then they transformed a Ministry of Economic Development in place of that, where 75% of the budgets were handled by this ministry in question. So we did have a past that had such ministries, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was called Ministry of Plan Implementation. So that was very powerful ministry under the presidency. So during President Jayawardhan's time, there were mega projects, as we know, Mahavali and all. So he knew that planning is essential and crucial for mega projects and development of the country. So that's why it was also under the president.
Yeah, so Asel, my point is now, in the time of J.R. Jayawardhan, we knew there were several powerhouse ministers like Gamanidhi Saranaika, Lalitatwala Mudali. They were doers. They were able to transform Mahavali. They were able to bring about massive changes in the Ports Authority. So we know there were some doers. But now you spoke about 2012, 2022, how presidents have been having 3,000 plus staff in their own personal staff. So how can you trust the presidents in power to handle a ministry like planning and evaluation. They would rig it.
Exactly, that is my point. That's why I brought this information here. Now, where is the accountability in this country? I'm a citizen. Now, if I talk, from that point of view, I should know why this president has this number of personal staff, whereas he has, the official staff also for his work. Of course, we can understand some personal staff. Now, you talked about the system change as well. According to, what I think about system change, it didn't happen for sure. Because what I mean personally is that now when there is a minister getting a ministry, right? So when he becomes the minister, automatically he gets, personal staff, let's say 15 personal staff, drivers, private secretary and media secretary, parliament secretary and all. Now they are the ones I have seen in this country running the ministry, not even the ministry staff. So how can you run a ministry with this situation? So this should be completely changed. Now after the Aragalia, was this change? No. Now not only about planning, right? So ministries, ministers and political leaders should be accountable. So they are managing the country, managing the budgets, managing the development on behalf of people. They have the mandate to do that for 5 years, maybe if they have 2 terms, 10 years, but within that they have to be genuine and give true leadership. So whether we are getting it is a question.
No, the real question is, Asela, now you speak about president's personal staff. Now we know Ranil Wickremesinghe was appointed as a president at a very decisive juncture in our country, but he goes on to appoint individuals in the caliber of Ruwan Wijewardena as his advisor on climate change. Now, is that a priority? We see how Rosi Senanayake was recently appointed as a presidential advisor. Is that a priority?
So not only that, whether there are some guidelines for a president to appoint president advisors. How many advisors can be appointed? And what is the limit? Who is approving that? Whether just, politicians have, marked their boundaries and this is my limitation. Okay, I can approve any number of presidential advisors, I can approve any number of staff and budget is limitless. So where is the boundary? So this is why I'm talking about accountability, and evaluation is also again contributes to the accountability. You ask about what we have in the country, only the national evaluation policy, but Parliament has prepared a national evaluation bill. This is Parliament Select Committee report, which includes the National Evaluation Bill, which is not approved yet, but it talks about Independent Evaluation Commission. I don't know whether how independent evaluation commissions work in this country, and what does it mean to the people and the doers in the country. But Independent Evaluation Commission. So if it is approved, this bill is approved and implemented in this country, so there should be a definitely difference. And accountability, evaluation contributes to the accountability. Accountability is the main issue here.
So, Devesh, just to touch on the gold smuggling matter again. So we have
all that glitters.
So we have a question from one of our viewers. Just to keep the panel informed, that many airline staff have been dismissed for having gold in their possession at the airport. Even carrying items of commercial quantity is also an offence, which warrants strict disciplinary action taken against the staff. Besides that, this particular MP in question states that the gold was packed into his luggage by another person without his knowledge. I don't believe so. This is a serious safety concern, as he could carry explosives in his bag packed by another person without his knowledge. This is unacceptable.
Yes, well, let's get away from the gold, which I think we are yet to see what will happen. Dr. Sara, you mentioned that we elect our political leaders, and therefore we, the public, are at least partly to blame or responsible for their being appointed there or elected there. But do we really get to elect whom we want? Because in our system of democracy, the voter goes to the polling booth and we are given lists and we are told to choose a party. So whether you have a party of, say, there's 20 names for your district, and you may not like half of them, but you still have to vote for a party. And your choice, your 3 choices or whatever, may not be the ones who are ultimately elected. So who decides on those party lists? It is the party,
The nomination board.
the nomination, whatever you might want to call it in each different party. But in many parties, it's not a democracy internally at all. It is 1 or 2 or just a few party leaders who decide on this. So given the fact that in most democracies, the major parties do get the bulk of the votes, we don't really get to choose whom we want, do we?
Well, all of those things that you said are right in terms of strengthening democracy. We need intra-party democracy, right? Not just inter-party democracy, but intra-party democracy. We probably ought to have primary elections and all of those kinds of things to strengthen the bonds of legitimacy, to strengthen the bonds of accountability between the voter and whoever is voted for. But nevertheless, we have civil society organizations who are, publicizing what people are talking about, what the views are of various political parties and indeed individuals in public life on certain issues. I mean, we, for example, we started the Center for Monitoring Election Violence on the grounds that, violence at the end of the day was an individual decision that people take, and the public need to know about it so that they can make an informed choice. So I think right along the line, there are certain things that can be done to change it, but there is no escaping from the fact that the basic mechanism of democracy, of choice and change, is elections, and that we as individuals are all involved in it. Now, when we go into the polling booth, what do we think of before we put that cross? And it can be any number of things. I mean, you have surveys that show that, people say they're going to vote one way, but they've gone into that polling booth and voted another way. Because they found that the guy on television, he was much more approachable and acceptable, and you could have a glass of beer with him and whatever, and he felt like the more approachable person. So, I mean, at the end of the day, we don't know what exactly makes people vote in the way that they do. But there is no escaping from the simple fact that in a democracy, people are responsible for their government. And if they feel that that responsibility is being taken away from them, they have to kick back and resist.
And Dr. Sar, just to again touch on what Nivesh spoke about, let's look at a presidential election for an example. You have a candidate from the SJB, you have a candidate from the UNP, you have a candidate from the SLPP, and you have a candidate from the NPP. I'm just hypothetically talking about these political parties. So you have 4 individuals in the field. So the people have no choice but to go and vote for one of them.
They don't have a choice.
They don't have a choice.
Why?
But what's the choice they have? There are 4 individuals running for a presidential election. What can they do?
What do you mean? So they choose amongst those 4. If they wanted others, they should have then formed parties, associations like the Aragalia and all of that to bring new entrance into the
But let's take a look at the
political
system in the US, for an example.
Yeah.
The Republicans, the Democrats, how they battle it out. They have college systems. The people can decide as to who their candidate is going to be, ultimate candidate
That's
from
what I
their
said.
political party.
You have primary elections.
And
You
then
have
they can decide.
No, you have primary
People have the
elections
power.
primary elections to choose who your candidate is. That's a peculiarly American thing, but yes, it's probably a good thing. But in Britain, you don't have that. You have members of parliament and they come together. I mean, Rishi Sunak is not someone who has been elected by the people of the country. He is also, again, someone who has a question of legitimacy, perhaps, that you can bring up. But, we, at the end of the day, if we want to call ourselves a democracy, a formal functioning democracy, which is what elections is all about, we cannot say that we don't have enough responsibility or that we do not have the opportunity to grab that responsibility. Because if you look at all the regressive things that governments have done, particularly with regard to the Constitution and all of that, there has been public support for it. There has been public support for it. And that's what's absolutely shocking at the end of the day. You know, and if we do not come to recognize, come in the next elections, whenever they're going to be, next year or whatever, that ultimately, as the Aragalia showed us, we can make a change. And we need to organize ourselves to make that change. Then I think we're sunk.
But Dr. Sarah, just to follow up here, okay, so we do then elect people, but then we are stuck with them for 5 years. And if one of them turns out to be a gold smuggler, there's nothing that the electorate can do about it. Now,
Well,
shouldn't there be some method of ensuring that such a person can be pulled out?
Centuries ago, Montesquieu said that the worst thing for democracy is for the average citizen to be apathetic. I find the person who tells me I'm not interested in politics, I find it very, very irritating and annoying, because by saying that, they are making a political statement.
Agreed.
No? They're making a political statement by saying that. The Aragalia showed us that you can do certain things. You can do certain things, and it would be an absolute tragedy if we don't.
And we've seen that happening elsewhere in the world as well.
Absolutely.
Tunisia, Egypt.
Absolutely.
We've seen it happen.
Yeah, okay. We've had.
Dr. Saravath, you just cited the Aragalia as an agency for change, right? But does it have to be an episode like that to bring about changes? Does it have to be an event
Well, I mean,
for reform?
well, you can do it through the ballot box at an election, but here was state capture by a family. And what did the Aragalia do? It brought people out onto the streets to say that this was wrong, this was damaging for our country, we want them out, and we want to change the system to prevent this type of thing from happening again. Yeah, so...
But
there
has
is
it happened, Dr. Sarah?
Sorry?
Has it happened?
No, this is the point. I mean, the thing is that, as I said, you know, the Rajapaksas have been taken out of government, perhaps, but they are not taken out of politics. We have to have an election. We have to have that whole process of legitimizing things. Yeah, but the Aragalia was an unprecedented act or event as far as the political history of this country is concerned, because people took it into their hands to come out and demonstrate what they wanted. Now, there is the next phase of the Aragalia in terms of, or the next phase of governance in this country in terms of what are the policies, what is the reform agenda, how do you proceed with it, and all of that kind of thing. But there's no denying that this act did show us that we do have some power if we are willing to use it.
So, Nicole, you spoke about how at home we start paying a garbage collector money to take our garbage and to ensure that all our garbage are taken. So we practice it quite often, even at home. What can the people do? You know, people also have a responsibility, isn't it? When we start giving, that means they will start accepting. So that will continue, because Swastika spoke about the corporate sector, for an example, and said that there are corruption taking place even in corporate sectors, which I won't deny, Swastika. So what action can you take as citizens at the end of the day?
Okay. So one thing is awareness for sure, because again, once we're in that system, once we see it happening, it's normalized. It can be and corruption, for example, can take so many wide forms, right? One interesting form is the idea of gifts and hospitality. In this country, gifting is so normalized and customary that you don't go to someone's house without giving them a cake or a biscuit packet, right? It's just so normalized. So now taking that kind of simple, normal thing, like gifting someone something, can also be a bribe, depending on who is giving it, depending on the intention behind it.
But the intention behind it, you can't gauge it.
Correct, but
So
in certain instances you
that's
can,
very
right?
subjective.
In certain instances you can. Now, if you're in the corporate sector, say you're getting a gift hamper during the month of December, and it's coming from a supplier. Now, if the supplier is giving it to you saying, oh, you know what, I value
Your services.
I value being of service to you, I value this relationship, this business partnership, here's a small token of appreciation, right? But now the supplier also knows that you're reviewing your supply chain in a couple of weeks. So you've already implanted that kind of thought in your mind, right? So, oh wait, if I want to take a new, if you want to take a new supplier, you'd be thinking, oh wait, oh those guys gave me something. You know, it kind of you kind of wash it away in that sense. You brainwash people in that way, right? So that's one kind of thing. But in terms of like you mentioned, citizens, right? Once we get used to a certain thing, and you really can't fight. You can't fight it, right? That's why whenever we talk about corruption in this country, a lot of people say, okay, but there's nothing you can do. We are going to be talking about the same thing. There's not going to be any change. If we don't start at the smallest level, there won't be change. So now, I like the example of the garbage collecting, right? If we don't start with children, from even the preschool level, there won't be change. So something that we've done very recently is also have an art competition in schools for children, telling them to draw art about corruption. And it's amazing the way they've drawn things, sometimes thinking of, you know, their parents, or sometimes seeing seeing things that happen in school. They've drawn art about it. We've even spoken to the Ministry of Education to introduce this concept of maybe corruption, ethics, those things should be in the school curriculum. Because if you don't learn it, if you go to school and, you know, what is our syllabus, right? You're learning algebra and science and all those things, and you come out with this, you know, being a studious person, but you might not have any ethics, you might not have any values in your mind. And when you enter the system, even if you are a good, ethical, moral citizen, you come into the system where no one will let you be ethical or moral, right? When it's happening normally, you have that problem, right? So if we don't start at the small level, from home, starting from your own households to schools, teachers educating the kids, if they see it from that age, you can't change it.
So Nicole, we have a question from one of our viewers. Corruption is an income generator in Sri Lanka. Only way to manage it is to install systems such as the US system of taxation. Can we do it in the country?
Okay, so we have taxes in this country, right? Whether people are accurately, let's say, paying their taxes is an entirely different conversation. But sorry, could you repeat the question again?
So what the individual is saying is, corruption is an income generator in Sri Lanka. Only way to manage it is to have systems such as the US system of taxation. Can we do it? So basically, can we have a system to manage corruption in the country?
It depends on how we're implementing it, right? How well the law enforcement is, because like we were talking about earlier, we have adequate laws. Are they implemented well? Maybe not so much. So I think it's important to one, raise awareness among the people, raise awareness even with the public authorities, right, in this sense. And yes, that's basically.
So there has been 2 budget proposals, including the current, which required all individuals to have income tax files opened. Eventually, it has a requirement to declare one's assets and liabilities. Seems like nothing has been implemented yet. Politicians are absconding this, isn't it?
So, like I mentioned earlier, the bill has not come to pass yet, right? So what has been happening is they've been declaring their assets, no one has really been investigating or reviewing the asset declarations to check if they're accurate, if everything is.
So the other question was, how will the accuracy of asset declaration be ensured?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I would say that will come into place with the new law, because of the transparency in the new law, the fact that asset declarations will be made publicly accessible, and it will be housed with the commission, the bribery commission. They themselves have the authority to investigate on those matters. They can even join up with other authorities such as the CID even, to if there are any kind of investigations, and take it on from there.
Right.
So,
Swastika, you spoke about the system change, as I said before. Are you happy with what's going on?
Since we spoke so much about garbage collectors, I want to make a comment and say that if garbage collectors are asking for extra money, I don't mind paying that now, because they are actually scraping the garbage for food, and I know this personally because I checked. So the economic conditions are so bad, the wages are so low, private sector wages for garbage collectors are so bad that, as I mentioned before, their children are not eating. So if they are coming and asking for extra money, and if that amounts to corruption, I don't mind paying that money. But in terms of system change, we also spoke about voter.
But the context in which I think
yes, no, I just want to
try to highlight was corruption even starts there at that very point.
Yes, but I just want to invert that and say that we should, if we want to talk about corruption, we should start from the top and not from the bottom, because I think corruption trickles down to the bottom. The reason I say that is, in Aragalia, one of the questions which people were asking is, where have the stolen money gone? Where has it gone? I mean, stolen money, if it's inside Sri Lanka, we can somehow retrieve it, but it has gone offshore, it has gone abroad. So when this question was raised in the Aragalia, one of the things which unions, including my union, the United Federation of Labour, what we did was we interrogated this question: where has the stolen money gone? And what we found was, we found a report called from an institution called the Global Financial Integrity, and they said that between a period of 10 years, through this process called misinvoicing in the export and import sector, $40 billion have left the shores of Sri Lanka. $40 billion through corporate corruption. So we raised this with the central bank governor. We raised this, and this was discussed in a parliamentary select committee. And then the other issue, of course, the exporters not repatriating the residual income, or the profits are not coming back into the country. So when we raised it with the central bank, there was a parliamentary select committee, and the central bank governor said, yes, since 1994, Sri Lanka did not have financial controls like India and Malaysia, where we didn't have financial control. So legally, businesses were permitted to keep money abroad for certain purposes. So the larger question which I want to raise is, when you have a small economy like Sri Lanka, and when you don't have financial controls, even in large economies like in which India and Malaysia has, when we don't have financial controls, the money which is being generated here, the profits which are being generated here, are not staying behind in this country. So how do we develop as a country? Yeah. Is a question which I want to raise, because you also spoke about gold and how did this amount of money go. We don't have financial controls.
So I'm just trying to be the devil's advocate in terms of the corporate sector here, because I think it's important and imperative to voice their concerns also. So you spoke about not bringing down the funds to the country. When there is so much of mismanagement in the country, when the country is going through a stage of bankruptcy, which man or woman or corporate entity will bring down their money when they know that corruption is so rampant in the country? Look at what I think we spoke, I was speaking to Asela before the show began. He said from all the projects that have been carried out in the country, only 12% have been implemented. Look at the amount of corruption. Look at when you go towards a town hall, you can see the Lotus Tower. What is the Lotus Tower sitting there and doing? Maithripala Sirisena said how much of corruption has taken place when he went to open the Lotus Tower in question. So when there is so much of corruption, if you go to Hambantota, you see convention centers that have been just closed down. What are those convention centers doing? So
But that
in
is
the
not
eyes of the corporate sector, when there is so much of mismanagement, I'm not defending the corporate sector for not bringing the money to the country, but the question would be, how are we going to earn that money back? Because for the corporate sector, it would be their ultimate goal is to make profits, and that is why they're in the country. Why isn't FDIs coming to Sri Lanka at the moment? Because there is so much of corruption. Because in the ease of doing business, we are nowhere in the list. So why would someone come to the country?
So there are two issues. The issue of misinvoicing, which is basically you don't invoice correctly, like you export a certain amount of goods and you don't show it in your balance sheet correctly. So that's essentially corruption. That's essentially misleading accounts, and it's a little hard to justify in terms of political corruption when you're also doing the same thing. I mean, corruption is corruption, whether it happens in the corporate sector or whether it happens in the public sector. So that is one issue where the corporate sector has misled its accounts and have kept money abroad. That is essentially what misinvoicing is, and this happened between the period of 2008 to 2019, so long before the crisis came out, right? So that's one thing. On this question of profit repatriation, this was last year when the central bank was asking the export sector to bring back the money because the country was in crisis. So yes, corruption is an issue, mismanagement is an issue. But if you remember, during the Aragalia, several export sector companies put out statements saying, we stand with the people of the Aragalia, we stand with the country, so on and so forth. And when the country was struggling for foreign exchange, the corporates decided to keep.
Unfortunately, Swastika, I don't agree with that.
So,
Why?
So
Because
the reason I'm raising this is because
I'm not talking on behalf of all the companies, but I know majority, at least the tea export companies.
This is by their own statement.
Right. Okay.
This is by their own statement.
But most of the companies, in Sri Lanka, I think when the government was scraping the barrel for exchange to bring down fuel to the country, it was exporters who got together and found that money. And they gave the government a loan. And I know this because personally I've spoken to many of the exporters, and they've told me this. They've given 40 million, 50 million, 60 million and collected 300 million and brought down the fuel to the country. And there was a time that the corporate sector in Sri Lanka united for a I don't know, I'm not talking on behalf of everyone, but at least a certain section did so, like the big corporates.
But we also have good politicians. So we are talking about a system here. We're not talking about one or two good people. A system can't run on the benevolence of a few people. It has to run on a system. And that is why people were asking for system change. Because a system has to be created where corruption cannot happen. And that corruption, we can't only talk about corruption in the public sector, because we are no longer a state-driven economy. We are a private sector-driven economy. So I go back to the question of, if the public sector is corrupt, who is supplying the corruption?
But
that is a question which we need to ask.
Yes. Is it so difficult to spot corruption? And
here in the private sector, yes, because we don't unless the company is listed in the stock exchange.
There's no transparency.
Yeah, there's no transparency.
Now, for example, in Sri Lanka, everyone knows everyone, and people talk, and you get to know a lot of things. So, for example, if you go and ask some of the supermarkets about their sales of hampers. Now, Nicole spoke about hampers, and if you ask them about their hampers, they will, I mean, informally, they will tell you who gets what and how much of it. So perhaps Asela, you can do an evaluation on that, and you will discover how many hampers on the top of the line, 1.5 to 2 lakhs, would go to each minister. Yeah. So it's not that easy to spot.
No, I'm sure we can spot corruption and where it's happening, and that's why we know politicians are corrupt and so on.
Swastika, when you speak about parking money and all that, I just, with my little bit
I'm just saying it's a system. It's just a system. That's all I'm saying. This is admitted by the central bank in a parliamentary select committee.
So the central bank has accepted, and it's in black and white. But if you look at an export company, right? An export company sends X amount of valued goods out of the country. So that is being reported at the CUSTEC, or the customs entry.
So apparently, the customs have not been keeping proper records.
So
for
whose
them.
fault is that?
So that is
that the
exactly what
corporate
I'm saying.
Is that the fault of the corporate sector?
The corruption is the fault of the corporates. If you are supposed to export a certain amount of value of goods, and you're not reporting that amount of value of goods in your balance sheet, and you're reporting less of that, then that is corruption. Whether it is tracked or not is a different matter. That is the fault of the system. But corruption is corruption. If this particular minister has not been caught, does that mean the corruption did not happen?
So as I'm not one of the members of the panelists today, I don't want to talk about too much about that because I respect the opinion of Swastika on that. So Asela, coming back to you, evaluation, you know, how important is evaluation for a country like Sri Lanka? Because I recollect a couple of years ago, I happened to be a chair of a AmCham event, and I spoke to Mr. Bhaskar Lingam, the very infamous Bhaskar Lingam, and I spoke to him and I said, it was a question posed by one of the members of the public. He wanted to know what is going on with the country and what should we do. Then he said, number one is implementation, number two is implementation, number three is implementation as well. So evaluation falls into which part of this?
Okay, I can answer for your example very quickly with the example you mentioned before, the projects, mega projects. So this is a report from the government. Actually, this is about 260 mega projects implemented in the country from 2012 to 2022. The total value was 5.8 trillion rupees. And these are health, education, roads, everything, right? And only 12% success achievement of these 260 projects, right? 260 projects are being implemented at a satisfactory level, only 12%. Even though 119 development projects have been delivered benefits to the people during this year, works of 20 projects only have been literally completed. So those
only
are
20?
Only 20 projects, right, literally completed. Now, the other important thing mentioned in this report is that country's economy would be much more stronger than it is now, and most of the prevailing issues in the development sector would not arise if the outputs and benefits of investment stated in these projects are delivered by the development projects, right? That's what it says. This is, you know, official report actually from the finance minister in November 2013. And it has two recommendations as well regarding the national evaluation policy. It says two recommendations. One is to implement the national evaluation policy, and the other one is to also include in 2023 budget speech a national operations center. So that is, you know, good recommendation. So if it is implementation, this is a very good example. Of course, you know, it talks about implementation. I mean, 260 projects tried to implement, but it's an utter failure in this country. And it caused the economic crisis in this country as well, because now projects are not completed, but we are paying the debts back. So this shows lack of monitoring and evaluation in this country. Not evaluation is after monitoring. Monitoring is continuous. Evaluation is in certain points. Even there was no monitoring according to this, right? If there was monitoring, now you don't have to wait for 10 years to see that 5.8 trillion rupees, only 12%. Do you have to wait for 10 years to see that? Because if you had good monitoring system, so it shows that the monitoring system we have in this country. And who is monitoring? We have ministers paid by the government, paid by taxpayers' money. We have officials paid by the taxpayers' money. We have the president above that, and all the, you know, staff responsible for this. But it is a failure of everyone's responsibility according to this. Of course, it's a good thing that this report is out, right, and trying to do something, and there are recommendations, so we should appreciate that. At the same time, now this shows many issues in the country regarding delivering service to the people. I talked about accountability. It's about what you are getting as ministers, politicians, leaders in this country, whether there is accountability. Also, whether there is accountability to deliver things to the people. That's the other question coming out of this. That's why evaluation is very important.
Because
you need to evaluate.
Because I recollect, Asela, when the Port City Economic Commission bill was being brought to Parliament, the Minister of Finance then said that the Port City Economic Commission bill is going to attract at least $25 billion worth of investments to the country. But where is it now? They're trying so very hard to sell the plots of land at the Port City even now, because it's becoming very, very increasingly difficult.
Yeah, that
so,
is the issue.
So no one is, at the end of the day, is taking accountability for the statements they're even making.
That is the issue in this country. We have, many other projects, like, there are, airports, no flights, right, ports without ships. So evaluation talks about 6 criteria, OECD that criteria, globally accepted: relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, coherence, impact, sustainability. There are 6 criteria. Now, if you talk about relevance, whether if you are doing something by the government to the country, maybe port, Colombo Port, the project maybe, or any other project. So the first thing is about relevance. If it is not relevant to the needs of the people, needs of the country, the vision of the country, why you are doing it. And if there is no economic gain, then country will be in a difficult situation. That's why we are in this difficult situation, right? So the evaluation criteria are very important, not only to conduct evaluation, even before you implement, you can go through evaluation criteria and see. Now, evaluation is not only after the implementation actually, because there is formative evaluation as well, formative and summative we say. At the beginning of a project also you can evaluate and see whether this is a viable project. Now, I don't know whether now you are spending billions of money and not even spending small money to evaluate and see whether this is a viable project.
To at least do a feasibility study and see whether this is going to be bring in any revenue at the end of the day.
Yeah, it says there have been some feasibility studies for some projects, but whether this is an independent study and whether this is a credible study,
that's a big question
accepted by others is a question. Now, evaluation, it should be credible, independent, and should be able to use by decision makers.
Yeah. So Dr. Sarah, you said something very interesting. You said that the change was the Aragalia was mainly to chase out the Rajapaksas from governance, and now they're in politics. Are you happy with the system now in place? You have President Ranil Wickremesinghe as the head of state. You have the SLPP backing him, and a member of that team who's backing President Ranil Wickremesinghe is former President Mahinda Rajapaksa and his son, alongside with Chamal Rajapaksa and Nipun Ranawaka, who are all members of the Rajapaksa family. So are you satisfied with that?
The question with regard to the government that we have is the question of the legitimacy of the government. It's not about the legality, it is about the legitimacy. And that question needs to be resolved fast. As you have it at the present moment, you don't have a popularly elected president. You have a parliament that has lost its mandate. You haven't had provincial council elections for 5 or 6 years, and you don't have local government elections. So where is the apex of power? It's all in the president's office. And the president has not been elected. And that legitimacy issue will come back. It's not going to go away. I think President Wickremesinghe has won a certain amount of stability with regard to on the economic side. But on the human rights side, on the political side, it's a time bomb. It's a potential time bomb. And that's why, I mean, we're talking about presidential elections next year, the sooner the better perhaps, so that this whole question of the legitimacy of government will be resolved. You see, I don't think you can parcel out, this is politics, this is economics, and never the twain can meet. The two go hand in hand, And because he has been able to come up with a counter-narrative as far as the Aragalia is concerned, because he has been able to stop the queues and all of that, there is a certain extent to which he has got a stability, a manufactured stability. But it's not widespread.
But do you think, Dr. Sarah, we see opposition political parties demanding for a snap election now?
No, I think
is that the way forward for us?
I think the opposition parties are playing a double game, and that is very simply this: is that they would like the Ranil Wickremesinghe regime to implement whatever the conditionalities of the IMF are. Then they will give it a little time, then they'll come out onto the streets, demand an election, which they probably will win. When they come into power, they'll say, look, we can't do anything about it. It's a done deal.
So you're saying even the opposition parties are playing petty political agendas right now?
Look, the JVP is going to come out onto the streets on the 8th of June. Now, where have they been with all of this stuff about Pradesh Sabha elections and all of that? Where have they been? Where has the SJB been with regard to the whole question of, calling for early elections and all of that? When the president, I think in Parliament it was, in that famous sort of video, pointed and sort of said, you told me this, you told me that, you told me this, don't hold elections, etc. I think he was saying quite a bit. Because I don't think that they want the political fallout from all of this. They want to be able to pin it on someone so that he will take the blame, and then they will come in and say...
Now, even if you look at it, Dr. Sarah, right now there is so much of discussion about freedom of expression in Sri Lanka. Where is the SJB? Where is the NPP? Where are these political parties now, Niresh? You are the director of you are handling a lot of affairs, political affairs, as well as a senior journalist. Where are these political parties now?
Yeah.
In hiding.
Absolutely, and today was quite a shocking day. We saw the new broadcast bill.
No, exactly.
And I quite expect a lot of journalists to get locked up very soon if this is passed, because this harks back to draconian laws like the criminal defamation law.
Exactly.
Dr. Sarah, you know that very well.
Yeah.
And you worked very hard, the CPA worked very hard to get that repealed about 20 years ago. And now it's back in an even
different form.
In a bigger, more dangerous form, and so on. So yes, where is the opposition?
Honestly, Swastika, where is the opposition? Tell me.
Not sitting in parliament.
No, I know you're not sitting in parliament.
Not a parliament.
But you are very opinionated. So I'm sure you have an opinion about that as well. Where is the opposition? Where is where are these political parties now? Yeah, where are these political parties?
They, I don't think they have.
Everyone has an agenda at the end of the day.
No, I think they don't have a political. Or
they have their own agenda.
Or
a petty political agenda.
Yeah.
Their own
so
agenda.
I don't think the opposition has an idea on where they want the economy to go or what they want to do. And if they say IMF conditionalities are too strict, then what is the alternative? I don't think the opposition has a plan. And yes, of course, they want the Ranil government to go on and to take the fallback. I completely agree with that.
But while our political parties are running behind their petty political agendas, the world is moving forward, and we seem to be ignoring the rest of the world right now and our place in it. And typically in matured democracies, Dr. Sarah, the parliament or Congress or whatever you want to call it is looking forward and planning the future of the country according to technology and so on, advancements all around the world. But we don't seem to do that, and we are constantly being overtaken and bypassed.
Yes, and I think, at the end of the day, I think we assume. The Indian Foreign Minister Jayashankar said that Sri Lanka, has been helped more by India than by the IMF. And he's absolutely right. And I think our politicians, those in government also at the end of the day, think that, look, India won't let us go down under. That they will keep bailing us out in one way or another. And that brings us back to this whole question. I mean, talking about planning and all of that. Look, if you look at the sort of symmetries within the economies in this part of the world, we and South India have the closest symmetries in terms of education and all of that kind of thing. We need to get a proper plan with regard to how we trade with India. And as far as the region is concerned, as far as Asia is concerned, if there's anything going for it, it's because the Indian economy is doing relatively well. You know, we need to get rid of all of these idiotic political notions of that they're going to come and swallow us up, and that if we have a free trade agreement, we will have Indian barbers on the streets of Colombo cutting people's hair. I mean, it's absurd. This is what's holding us back.
And we are, I think, Samir, to add to that, we are actually physically so close as countries that a few days ago, a young man from St. Michael's College in Batticaloa, he just swam across
32 kilometers. It's not that far.
No, exactly.
So, Nicole, we have a question for you. In many countries like India and the UK, corruption is managed effectively by a single revenue authority comprising tax, customs and excise. A separate revenue enforcement authority works in tandem with the revenue authority. In Sri Lanka, there is a lack of concerted action as our revenue authorities work independently of each other, and enforcement is also decentralized through the central bank, police and other government bodies. Hence, due to a lack of coordination and transparency, corruption cannot be managed effectively. Shouldn't this mechanism be a part of effective system change?
That's a good one, because the statement is true, right? We see very often there's law enforcement authorities that are sometimes working on the same case but just not sharing information, right? Because they are bound by different secrecy provisions and clauses, right? So if we are to bring about some kind of change, working together is the only way to do it, right? And I fully agree with that, because I think this idea of working together, there's this concept that we talk about predominantly in the private sector as well, of collective action, right? If one person is trying to change something, you find it very difficult to do it. You will be met with roadblocks, stops along the way. Whereas if you all get together to achieve a common goal, either agree to work on similar principles, follow certain values, or if you take this example, if law enforcement gets together saying, okay, let's work to catch the same criminal, right, then you will see a change. Right?
But it's a far reality in Sri Lanka.
We will have to see how it goes, right? But this idea of collective action is something that has worked all over the world, and it's not
worked very well.
Yes, and the interesting thing with collective action, if you take, it sounds like a very European kind of westernized concept that's not ever going to work in a country like ours, but it has shown to work in even countries like Thailand, which have similar systemic levels of corruption like Sri Lanka. So if that's the way to go about it, maybe we can make some changes.
Dr. Sarah, they say that Sri Lankans are very forgetful. Do you think so?
Well, I mean, we are supposed to not remember things for too long, but we never really forget it. If someone then suggests something, it gets aroused.
Because we see in the political fora that even the name of Basil Rajapaksa coming into light about a presidential candidate. And when you look at other countries like Philippines, for example, we saw how the Marcos Bongbong came back to power after so many years. People seem to be forgetful as to what went on in Philippines many years ago, and they decide to re-elect a member from the same family. So would that happen in Sri Lanka again?
No, but this is where the opposition has to be vigilant. You have to keep reminding people of the mistakes, the drawbacks, the atrocities, the whatever that these people have done.
But the opposition is not even in Colombo, no, Dr. Salah. Most of the time they are
this is the thing,
jungles
that
and
if it's not the opposition, then civil society has to sort of say, look, this is what the agenda of reform is, this is why this is the agenda of reform, because these people have just made such a terrible job of it that we have to do all of this. But you have to, I mean, it's about that persistence. It's about that persistence, where you tap into the anger and frustration of the people to turn it into something more constructive.
It seems like, Dr. Sarah, I hate to say this at Face the Nation over and over again. It seems like what Ranjan Ramanayaka said once to the media, they are all friends. It seems true.
Yeah, but we are not their friends now, so we get a chance once a year to decide as to whether they are going to enjoy the same perks and whatever. And that's where we have to act. I mean, there is no substitute.
And that comes once in 5 years.
But there is no substitute for that. That is what democracy is about. I mean, you can't have elections every other year, no? You also have to govern, So you have to take the opportunity when you get it. And then you have to keep reminding people of what the records of all of these guys are. And I think it's very much of a failure of the opposition. Media plays a huge role in that.
Media plays a big role, particularly in recent times with the arrest of one stand-up comedian and a journalist, and more arrests, I think, are coming on the way. And
more arrests are coming on the way.
I think so. But and with the whole the media, yes,
the broadcast bill, yes.
Yes. So what was disturbing for me, I don't want to mention specific names or anything. What was really disturbing was the way some of the mainstream media was narrating this arrest. And I did mention it in a press conference, said, when did the mainstream media become this place where they start outing people? They say, okay, you have arrested this person, now here is the other person who is doing something wrong, now go and arrest. So there are certain things which, there are certain things which institutions must stick together. And when it comes to freedom of expression, it does not matter if it's alternative media or mainstream media. Media should stick together and say, we stand together on freedom of expression, absolute freedom of expression. And we won't support the government when it comes to arrest and detention of a person who has expressed her opinion, which is not amounting to, waging war against the state, which is what the ICCPR Section 3 is about. But the mainstream media has not done that, which is very worrying. And this is the kind of media narrative which builds up and builds up. And then there is suddenly riots, there is suddenly war. It starts off when there is violence against women because of a certain narrative which is being built up. So media plays a huge role in how society perceives certain things, how society perceives racial relations, how society perceives gender relations, the LGBTQI community. So I think media has a huge role to play in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, what I was trying to add is you covered a little bit of my point actually. We're talking about, Dr. Sarvan Muthu was talking about how we need to elect the right people, right? So kind of combining both your points, voter education is important, and you can do it as media, as a media company, right? It's important that you use the platform that you have to get the message out. We see sometimes there are amazing, eye-catching videos, very thought-provoking videos, which can actually even change mindsets, right? So it's important that even you, let's say, join the fight against corruption, right? And even educate the people about this.
Even if the media gets on board and if they, contribute to voter literacy and things like that, do you see a viable alternative, someone who could actually break the culture?
In the current political system, you're saying, right? So again, it gives space. People need to come into politics, right? There are several people that will be talking, saying, okay, fine, we need this change, we need that change. We've started seeing some youth parties have been forming, and they are the future, right? Because what we constantly see is they are not coming into politics, maybe because there's some kind of resistance from the parties. Maybe they don't have the adequate qualifications. Maybe, let's say, they are too ethical to join. That could also be a problem, right? So the more people know about this, the more people start voting at even the local government level, from your Grama Nildari to your Pradeshi Sabhas, to all those levels. Once you start electing people that are not, oh right, they did me a favor, so I should elect them. Oh, they are related to somebody else I know, so I should elect them. Oh, they went to my school, I should elect them. No, you are looking at electing people based on what they are doing, not, oh, did they do something that benefited me? Did they do something that benefited the area I live in, right? Once those changes start happening, is I think when you that's how more let's say qualified candidates will come into power, right?
But aren't our politicians really good at fooling the people? We had the 6.9 million in the last election.
We have a lot of people coming and saying, oh,
we had 5 million plus voting opposition as well.
Exactly.
Let's not forget about that.
Yeah.
We vote for the acts, no?
We vote
But
for
elections is also a very expensive process, or like a new entrant. I mean, it's not easy for, let's say, a new person to come in and win an election with the amount of budget one needs to. So that also comes in, the financial aspect also. So it's not only about voter literacy alone, but it's also about the money involved in campaigning. And I think that plays a huge role in actually putting barriers to people entering politics, I think, particularly when it comes to young people.
Yeah, I mean, a bit of sort of unsolicited advice for those who are trying to form parties and come in. I think there is a tendency to think that you must form a party and contest all over the country. I would say no, focus on a district. Because if it's a close election result, you might find yourself as being a power maker, a power broker. Focus on a district.
Yeah, so Asel, do you want to add to that conversation we were talking about before, about voting, about how important is accountability and all that and more? Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, very quickly, I want to mention, Dr. Saravana also mentioned, our political parties are not democratic. How can you expect democracy from non-democratic parties? Because if you take, I don't want to mention any, almost all the political parties see the leaders, they are not changing. And who is taking the decisions within the parties? Whether the party members, so-called party members, if there are enough number of party members for some parties, whether they have the privilege to change the leadership, right? So we cannot expect any democracy if the parties are not democratic. At the same time, I again repeat that we vote for the acts, right? Why? Because we have these options, and people's perception should also be changed, not only the politicians, right? So I think it is not only we are talking about, people should think about this, but at the same time, political parties, whether we have right parties, and why we have parties every day, adding new parties while having many parties. What's the reason? So I think all these should be, of course, evaluated, should be reviewed, and see what happened to our political system, what happened to our democratic system.
Right. So I want to give each member an opportunity to close tonight's debate or discourse or dialogue, as you may put it, and give us a way forward for Sri Lanka. What must we do? I'll give you 3 minutes each. Let's start off with Asela Kaluganpitiya, Director for Centre for Evaluation at the University of Sri Lanka. He's also an attorney at law. What is the way forward, Asela?
Yeah, I think what is institutionalized in this country is the corruption. What is not institutionalized is anti-corruption. Why this corruption is institutionalized? It is starting from the garbage collector up to the gold smuggler, and even bigger than that, right? But I think, as some of the members, panelists correctly mentioned, for me, whether it's small fish or big fish, same thing. And why I am saying it's institutionalized, because it's, common for everyone. It's, people think it's okay. I'm just getting 50 rupees and this one is 70 million. So that's, they are okay for that. So that's why it is institutionalized. And definitely, so we have to change this situation. So people's mindset should be changed. General public, this is what I think. At the same time, you also asked about the system, and there was a question about the system, whether this, if we have online systems like other countries, whether we can reduce the corruption. I believe that, because now we can get car license online. So people tend to give maybe 50 rupees, 100 rupees for doing, different things when you go to the office. But if you get online, you can definitely eliminate those things. So I do believe, because some countries like Australia, the systems are very well and systems are working. Having system is not enough. The system should work. At the same time, I think the parliament has a role. We have, democratic institutions in this country, parliament, executive presidency, and there are many other democratic institutions. So these should work. If we have access in the parliament, how do we expect policies, good policies in the country? Are we electing policy makers to the parliament? Are we getting them to the parliament? Or we have, different other people in the parliament? If we need policy making, we need parliamentarians, politicians to steer this country for economic prosperity. We need to have right people in the parliament. This is what people should think about. And definitely we need to have good accountability system. Politicians should be accountable, and people should also think towards that. If people don't want that, and if people think, now imagine if a parliamentarian going by a motorbike to the village or going by the Prado, what is more accepted by people? Definitely people like, your parliamentarian to come by a Prado, whether it is, stolen money or whatever, doesn't matter. What you want is your parliamentarian to come like, a hero.
The grand entrance.
Exactly. So this is the attitude we have in the general, public. And what we need is, in this country, strong, true leadership, I think. At the same time, accountability and, of course, monitoring and evaluation systems to gear this country for economic prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Asali Karakapitia. I now move my attention to Nicole Elias, Program Manager, Transparency International, Sri Lanka.
So we talked about several different things, but one thing for sure is that if change doesn't start with us, we're not going to expect to see change with everyone else. Yes, we as elected officials, we expect them to, let's say, act better than how we would act, but if we are not doing the same thing, we can't expect that change, right? It's from something as simple as, paying off the police officer who will stop you for a speeding fine, when you think it's not really costing me, it's not costing anyone else, because I'm just, making that person happy and kind of getting, getting out of a fine. But in the long run, you've changed the mindset of that police officer to expect a payment in the future. So you have started the system, and then you complain about that there's no way out, but we've actually contributed largely to the problem, right? So I think one thing to keep in mind is, going forward now with the IMF restructuring and the new anti-corruption bill that's currently being tabled in Parliament. It's we're hoping to see a lot of good changes with this bill, because it's even introducing things like private sector bribery, which earlier was not really an offense, right? Even the fact that asset declaration transparency is better. These are all positive things to look out for. But while these laws are introduced and while strong legislation is good, it's only as strong as the implementation. So there, it's important that the citizens also call out for this. All of us here, corporates, citizens, and that the public officials actually implement these things, right? And also that we use the right tools to call corruption out when it happens. So, we discussed in very brief RTI, the right to information. That's such an amazing tool that we have in this country, which doesn't get talked about enough, I think, and is not used too much in Colombo. It's all over the country. It's very.
But when it's used, it takes 2 years.
No, not really.
Not all the time.
It's
actually quite effective.
It's very effective. That's what I wanted to respond to that earlier.
Right.
80 to 90% of the cases.
Because Nicole, if it's going to take 2 years, I'm not going to even touch the RR.
No, I understand what you're saying, right?
Go to it.
If you follow the RTI process, and we have one of the strongest laws in the world, the 4th strongest law in the world. It sounds absurd, but it's actually true. And when you go to the Right to Information Commission stage, 80 to 90% of the cases have been given in favor of the citizens. So they're getting this information. So the solutions are happening, it's starting, but it's like we have a lot more to do. But if citizens start using their rights, and we have this right, we all have the right to information, if we use that, we can see changes very soon. So,
thank you very much, Nicole. Attorney at Law Swastika Aragalia.
So last year, we were talking a lot about elections and democracy. But I always say this, democracy doesn't start and stop with elections. It's also a continuous process. We don't have to wait for 5 years if we want to see changes in what's happening in the political landscape and the economic landscape of the country. And that is exactly what people proved last year, where they came in millions and they removed an all-powerful executive president from his seat, which has never been done before in this country. So I just despite the fact that there is a lot of political repression which is going on the street, I just want to remind that is what democracy is. We don't wait for election to wish for change. We push for change through street protests, by speaking, through exercising our freedom of expression, and so on. So that's just one thing which I wanted to strongly emphasize on in terms of democracy and how democracy works in a country. The other thing is, because we spoke so much about the president's personal staff, let me tell you, we have been asking for a very long time to get rid of the executive presidency. So we should just do that, so we don't have to worry about president's personal staff and this bloated budget. And the reason I say talk about executive presidency is because we always look for a strong leader, but I don't think that is what we wanted, that is what people voted for in Gotabaya Rajapaksa. We want a strong leader, he is going to take us out of this crisis and so on. But what we actually need is a democratized leader who listens to what people want, who responds to the needs of the people. And that is how I think a country can be taken forward politically and economic through get out of this crisis. And I think that is what we don't have in this country. And as long as we have the executive presidential system, our country's democratic structures will keep on eroding, because that structure stands outside the executive, the legislature, as well as the judiciary, and controls all arms of the state and does not allow it to function democratically. And the third thing, because we started off by talking about corruption, I just want to say, when we speak about corruption, it's not enough to only speak about the corruption in the public sector. We also have to speak about corruption in the private sector, because it is these two together which drives the public and the private, which drives the country forward. So if you're only focusing on the accountability of one arm of this one aspect of this large issue, then we are just missing out on the larger sea of issue which is going on the other side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Swastika. Dr. Sarah, the baton is yours.
Well, so it's a question of, do we need new institutions or do we need new people? In the sense that we have some fairly decent institutions, but we have a problem with implementation. The bureaucracy doesn't want to do these things because it has been corrupted, it has been eroded, whatever. So the way I see it is that, look, there is a long-term question here of changing the culture with regard to governance and all of that. That's the education system. That's going to take 25 years. We have to start talking about accountability, transparency, all of that thing, and to bring a new generation of citizens that can be citizens of a fully functioning democracy. In the short term, I don't think we can do very much, or I don't have a clear idea as to what we can do to change the way that people think about it. But all we can do is to hammer away at the institutions. And I agree absolutely with Swastika that if there is one thing that will make a difference, you know, we talked about earlier about ministry secretaries and all of that kind of thing. Who appoints the secretaries to the ministries? It's the president. And the secretaries to the ministries are the chief accounting officers of their ministry. So, you know, they can't be, the president can't be in charge of monitoring and evaluation. It's like the Attorney General's department, where they're the chief advisor to the government and the chief prosecuting officer. You know, so we need to sort of hammer away at changing those things and hope that they will begin to make a difference.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parkeshwar Saravamuthu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives, Attorney at Law Swastika Aralingam, political activist Nicole Elias, Program Manager, Transparency International Sri Lanka, as well as Attorney at Law Asela Kalukampitia, Director for the Center for Evaluation at the University of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Shania. Thank you very much, Niresh, a senior journalist, for joining us this evening on the show. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. If voting changed anything, for the very first time you will see members of the government and opposition uniting together, passing laws, and you know what they would do? They would make it illegal. Take care and good night.